first, so we know. Good evening and welcome to the Women Hold Up Half the Sky event. The PEG Center is really excited right now because we just had our 1-year anniversary as a nonprofit. So as a nonprofit, we are dedicated to arts, culture, and activism in our communities. We welcome you here tonight and remind you that our programs are always free to everybody. That means that art installations, speakers, events, educational forums, community art projects, and community service opportunities are all free. We depend on your generosity and so that we can continue to bring these important programs. So drop a check in the bowl or go to our website, thepegcenter.org. Thank you so much. So, as for most of the exhibitions that I curate, it starts with a seed idea or a person or a conversation. And this one started many, many months ago with Serena Khan Reddy. And as I said to somebody, I think it might have been her mother, when we first started talking, it was like, I don't understand this, but I'm going to follow you anyway. And it actually was like that for most of our time of working together on this. Was like, I didn't know what she really had in mind until it appeared. And we are so excited actually to have Serena here because of the multimedia aspect of her work. And for us, it's one of the first times that we've ever had that all going at once. So we're very, very excited about it. So tonight we are going to hear from 4 of our artists, Serena Khan Reddy, Angela Ale, Patricia Miranda, and Mary Hart. Helen Zugheib is at an opening of her own work in Washington, D.C., so couldn't be here tonight, but she will watch the recording, so we're happy about that. So we're going to begin. We're going to hear from 4 artists, so we want to get right to it. I'm just going to introduce each one very, very briefly and then hold the timer. Serena Khan Reddy is a visual artist and media specialist at the Davis Museum at Wellesley College. She lives in Amesbury, and this is from her written statement. In this new series, My Taj Mahal, I investigate my identity of being raised in the United States with a father who was an Islamic immigrant from British India, where he identified as British in so many ways. My mother grew up in Yankee New England and was a no-nonsense, do-it-yourself kind of person. I find myself negotiating these contradictions in my identity, questioning traditional women's roles, and yet at the same time, so desperately trying to fulfill them. Please welcome Serena Khan Reddy.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. Thank you, Paula and Mark, for your support and giving me this space to explore and create without any constraints and trusting me. I'm also honored to be part of a group exhibition with Angela, Mary, Patricia, and Helen. Your work is amazing, and I look forward to hearing your stories. Let me tell you a little bit about my background for those of you who don't know me. I'm a media artist, engineer, educator, activist. I critique culture. I create content. I map ideas into large digital bytes. In my past video, photo and installation work, I focused on challenging the dominant narrative, looking to reshape, rethink, and reinvent our responses to globalization, the media, and appropriation. Some of the themes that I was most interested in are the new colonization and globalization, looking at the economic system, and war and militarization and how they're fueled by corporate globalization. One video that I want to touch upon from the past, and you'll see how it relates to this work, was a piece I did early on in 2000 called With Us or Against Us. And it shifted between footage in the Oval Office of President Reagan meeting with Afghan freedom fighters and footage of Hollywood movie Rambo 3 that my brother had said, "Did you watch this movie?" I'm like, "No, I didn't." But, and there's a subversive ticker tape at the bottom that complicates the simplistic message of good and evil in the news that the news shows. The question of how history is deliberately forgotten is raised through a metaphor of writing and erasing. The way I see the world, in the past we had colonization where people, places, and things were appropriated. And now with globalization, it is resources, labor, and ideas that are appropriated. and carbon is given back. There's the elite and the marginalized, the haves and the have-nots. But why am I telling you all this? How does it relate to this personal work? In my mind, I see a very clear connection from the universal stories to the personal. The same concepts motivate my work. This is about my journey, my path, my dharma, calling, unraveling my lived experiences, my choices, my karma. I ask the questions of myself and the audience: who gets to define meaning and who doesn't? Who has the power and who doesn't? Who are the haves and have-nots, the elite and the marginalized? Who is heard and who isn't? We live in an age of late capitalism with radical individualism. The collective is often forgotten. There are those that make meaning, get to define the dominant culture, and there are those that don't. And at the same time, it is not so clear cut. You can find yourself throughout your life on both sides of the table. If you're Black, Hispanic, Islamic, Armenian, fill in the blank, a woman, etc., you may feel you are marginalized and not recognized. You may feel you need to make your voice heard, or you may feel strong in who you are and recognized by the dominant culture. You may feel privileged and therefore able to use that privilege to make a seat for others at the table. So again, I'm deeply grateful to Paula for giving me this space to explore and come from a very personal angle that she trusted me to share my voice. And I want to thank all of those who supported me along the way. You know who you are, too many to name at this point. So let me start with the title. The title of my Taj Mahal. I've been doing many works with this similar title. I explore, I won't repeat what, throw me off, what Paul has already said, but basically looking at my father's background, growing up Islamic immigrant from India, feeling deeply British. He was also a very industrious immigrant who believed wholeheartedly in the American dream. And my mother, from New England, British, but maybe perhaps more Scottish, taught me a true appreciation and respect and understanding for nature and health. Through these lenses, I'm telling hybrid stories, negotiating the contradictions of being other in the Indian diaspora, as well as the place my father immigrated from, India. I see my role to share these stories, to add to the understanding of how deeply interconnected we all are. I find myself negotiating these contradictions in my identity, questioning tradition's women's roles, and yet at the same time, so desperately trying to fulfill them. We negotiate the contradictions of our parents' identities and therefore our own. So in the title, my Taj Mahal, in the past, I created a piece called the Western Taj Mahal that was about Buckingham Palace. My father's Taj Mahal is part of a larger piece. And if you look closely in the mural, there's a hidden picture of my family in 1972 at the Taj Mahal. And I think that this symbolizes who has the power to make meaning. And hopefully you'll understand when I give this little bit of history. I mean, most people, when they think of the Taj Mahal, which was built during the Mughal period with Emperor Shah Jahan in the 1600s, and the myth goes that he built it for love with his favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. It then became this quintessential romanticized monument from Queen Victoria to former President Roosevelt. So when I was in graduate school, I did extensive research on the Indus Valley and also on Vedic traditions. And it became very clear to me that to really understand the Taj Mahal, one had to understand two notions of the Quran that are expressed very specifically in the landscape. The first is this depiction of the Day of Judgment. The Taj Mahal itself is built on the image of Allah on his throne. And Shah Jahan wanted to create a monument that would embody the Quran in his power. The second aspect of the Quran expressed in the landscape is the way that Muhammad saw it on his visit to paradise. These inscriptions are written on the Taj Mahal, are very detailed descriptions of paradise. The gardens in front of the Taj Mahal are not the formal decorative gardens that the West describes them as. So I raised these questions. Was the Taj Mahal the ideal symbol of love and devotion, or was Shah Jahan's intention to create the ultimate symbol of Islam? Even though Mumtaz was Shah Jahan's favorite wife, many questions remain. Would the Taj Mahal have been built anyways if Mumtaz hadn't died? Is the true meaning of the Taj Mahal what Shah Jahan thought, what the British thought, or was there many truths to this highly complicated monument? How is meaning made, and more importantly, by whom? Has the Taj Mahal become this colonialist subject of appropriation? Was the monument remade, sanitized, exoticized, and appropriated by the West? Is it Indian at all? So why am I telling you all this? For me, I identify on all these levels: an Islamic symbol, quintessential monument of love, a monument of loss, and I'm making my own meaning as well. This piece or series is about acknowledging the profound moments that I'm lucky enough to have experienced in my life. I'm a lifelong seeker, a traditional Hindu wife, a divorced woman, a Yankee, a lover of nature, an American rebel, an artist, an engineer, an Islamic daughter, an ethnic minority, a Sufi dancer, an American soccer mom, a North Indian Muslim. I am none of these things and all of these things. 100% fully engaged until I'm not. For me, the nature, of course, of human experience is to change. What is perfect in one moment, a decade later is not. For me, it is about acknowledging the profound perfectness of each of these moments I've experienced. In this lifelong seeking, I've extensively researched and practiced Islamic Sufi traditions to Hindu Vedic practices and many things in between. Many ideas that I've explored in this work are concepts that are grounded in the Bhagavad Gita, which really is a story about defining Dharma, or your calling. Stephen Cope, a scholar, writer, and researcher who is the director at Kripalu, wrote the book, The Great Work of Your Life, which captures these concepts brilliantly in his interpretation of the Gita. He discusses this catalog, quote unquote, of methods that human beings have discovered over the last 3,000 years of how to find self. And he discusses the obstacles of fear and doubt and the power of vulnerability. All of these things have contributed to my work and understanding of my path. These are the questions that I ask myself, and I hope others do when looking at this work. What are your choices? Do you have freedom to make choices? Are you privileged? Are you marginalized? Do you follow your inner truth or outside cultural norms? Whose norms? What parts are self-chosen? What parts are imposed by others' expectations, agenda, and influence? We question our roles as women and at sometimes try to fulfill traditional women's roles. We struggle, we rebel, we conform. Do we follow our crazy devotional inner calling? I suggest we're all thirsty for stories that suggest the road less taken is worth taking. And I'll end with what really got this work rolling was at the start of the pandemic with the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd's death. I was working at the Davis Museum, Wellesley College, as a technology and media specialist. And my job was to look at how to use technology in more equitable and inclusive ways to show the collection. And now museums across the country scramble to figure out how to come to terms with their colonized beginnings. For me, it legitimized my perspective. DEAI, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. Everyone's voice should be heard. No discrimination from age, race, class, sexuality, religion, job function, degree. So I had this aha moment where I realized that I intrinsically understand the position of non-inclusive because I grew up with mixed identity. Therefore, I'm inherently concerned with justice. And so for me today, this brings me to my new family that I'm bringing to the table. Recently, I've become very involved with the Mirzai family. They're an Afghan family in our community. There's 11 of them: Mohammed, Zarifa, Tawab, Soma, Huma, Shoba, Shabir, Samira, Yasser, Mosia, Mosiola. To me, this is an extension of my father's family in India, coming back to my roots and feeling utterly at home with this large Islamic family from Afghanistan with similar economic and cultural traditions. I also have a new family with the core volunteers at the Unitarian Church, which brings me to my upbringing with my mother, where she introduced me to the Unitarian Church in Portsmouth as a child, a fabulous group of volunteers that I couldn't be happier to work with. Thank you.
That was fabulous, wasn't it? Um, I especially loved hearing all that you are and aren't. I loved it. I loved it a lot. You know, in our limited space, when we curate a show, we follow threads, and this is a show of 5 women artists that create a tapestry of conversation, of narrative, of dialogue with each other and with the audience. And it's just been such a pleasure to choose art that speaks to my heart and soul, but know that it's connected and connected in all the right and perfect ways, which often doesn't happen until we hang the show, Julie and I. And it's always a big surprise, but it usually works really well. So Angela Ale just got here, so we're going to give her a little break and we're putting Patricia up. Is that okay? So Patricia Miranda, this is her wall, of which when you go on her website, you will see that she has created rooms, I mean, stadium sized rooms of these things. And she's got a show coming up tomorrow, opening tomorrow in Portsmouth. So we're very excited about that. But Patricia Miranda is an artist, a curator, and educator. I didn't know this until I read it. She is the founder of the Crit Lab, which are graduate level critical seminars for artists, and of MapSpace, a project space and residency program. She writes, "My work is grounded in historical material practices, rituals of grief and mourning, and textile as an intimate form that wraps our bodies from birth to death. I work with donated, repurposed lace and linens and site-responsive sculptures and installations." This came in a tiny little box that was like 8 ounces. And it was like, oh, this majesty came out of that tiny little box. The accumulated textiles reflect the hidden economic labor and the labor of care in the domestic and work lives of women. Notions of mending, remembering, collecting, and preserving are present in each action and each work. The lace is alternately hand-dyed and sewn into shroud-like tapestries and installations and layered with books and objects of lamentation akin to ex votos, reliquaries, and other ritualized forms traditionally offered to saints in request, gratitude, or devotion. I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Please welcome Patricia Miranda.
Hello, hello. Hard act to follow. Thank you. I'm really so thrilled to be here. I'm so excited to find out about this place and this community. I'm from New York City, and up here because I have to do my job here, and I do have a show opening of a very large installation works at the 3S Art Center in Portsmouth tomorrow night. So if you're around, and you can see more about my work in some catalogs. So yeah, I'm super thrilled to be here. I'm really honored that Paula reached out to me and to be part of this with these amazing artists. I'll just begin really with this particular body of work, which is in March of 2020, in the beginning of the pandemic, I had been working with family lace of my Italian grandmother, Ermenegilda Eugenia Glorinda Fangaroli, and my Irish grandmother, Rebecca Cogan. I had who was an orphan from Belfast, and that's a very interesting story. But so I had been working with the lace, and I'd been dyeing it with this. These particular pieces are dyed with cochineal insect dye, which has a very long cultural and political history. I'm very much a material culture person, so I'm interested in the way that materials communicate content and bring their entire histories, their material histories, aesthetic histories, cultural, political, social, etc., scientific histories with them and become part of content in the work. And so I had been working with lace for a little while. One of the reasons I started working with textile was because I had become a little bit disillusioned with, I'd been working in sculpture and a lot of other materials, and I sort of was thinking about the machismo of these large installation projects and how I wanted to live into the ambition of the work and my own ambition as an artist, and also make works that had a small ecological footprint. And so one of the ways I could do that was working with repurposed textile, That was sort of one aspect of it, and working with natural dyes and pigments and kind of thinking if my objects could be buried, would they be safe? And that's one of the sort of measures, the sort of ethical aesthetics that I sort of endeavor upon. So in March of 2020, I was working with some lace. I was dyeing some lace with cochineal insect dye, and which I could talk about for hours. If you don't know anything about it, I could give you a whole history if there's time. I don't know. So I was doing this, and I posted on Instagram some images of dyeing this lace. Instantly, I began to get some responses saying, I have some lace. Would you like this lace? And I said, oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. And someone sent me I thought, oh, I'll get a little package of lace. I got an enormous box of lace, and then another enormous box of lace, and then a small package and an envelope and another box and on and on and on. And people started sending me all of this lace. And so about 3 boxes in, I realized that these are much more important materials than I initially had realized. And I realized that this was a historical community archive, and that women primarily, wasn't only women, but it's primarily women, were going through had this lace in their closets, in their basements, in their attics, that their grandmothers or great grandmothers or families had made. Sometimes it was handmade, sometimes it wasn't. It was every kind of lace from every kind of material. It was all treasured by the family or by that person who gave it to me, but they didn't know what to do with it. Their children didn't want it. They didn't want to throw it away. They didn't want to give it away. And they thought, wow, what a way for this lace to live on in an artwork such as this. And so I realized that this was an archive. And so I began to document every single piece of lace. And that meant photographing, measuring, and archiving every single piece before it gets used in an installation work. I currently have about maybe a small room size box assortment of boxes and bags and envelopes and packages of lace that has yet to be documented. And so I realized this, and then people began sending me the stories about the lace, that their great grandmother made this lace, or they sat at the foot of their grandmother when they were doing it. Their grandmother taught them. I had someone gave me a little package of chemical lace. It wasn't even handmade. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but their family hid it in a cave during World War II in Czechoslovakia. So the stories of how lace is integrated into people's lives and into women's lives in particular, both as a commodity of labor, a way that women often made their living in a sometimes an often very brutal way, but also a way that could give women some economic power or freedom. The culture of lace being one of those things that shows the hidden labor of women. So it started with this idea that if I aggregate this lace into very large installations, then that hidden labor that is like thinking of your, the patronizing notion of your grandmother's doilies, right? And the fact that that's not an art form just would infuriate me, right? That they're not making actual art objects. And so this aggregation into these large installations, and this is quite a small one. At 3S Arts, I have one that's 36 feet long by 11.5 feet tall. And I have some other very large sculptural objects, which I hope you'll come and see. Anyway, this idea of aggregation being a way of making hidden labor visible became a very important aspect of the work. And the idea of these as kind of shroud-like, especially during the pandemic, as shroud-like objects, layered with these X photos was a kind of beginning for the project. It has since evolved because I'm a big advocate when I work with artists. I often say, pay attention to what shows up. And this lace showed up at my door. I didn't know it was going to turn into my life's work. There's now a website. I've gotten a grant to pursue the lace archive, and again, still using it in the work. And then as it evolved, one day, some aprons showed up. And I thought, well, aprons aren't part of this. Aprons, these are not lace. There might've been lace on them, but I was like, I don't know. I'm not really into the aprons, but let's just let them hang out. And they hung out and more aprons came. And before I knew it, aprons are an enormous part of this project. And you'll see it if you come to the installation. And I started to look at these aprons and to think about them in relationship to the hidden labor of care, which is related to the labor aspects of lace. But labor of care is the kind of hidden adornments that happen inside the home, the domestic sphere where women had real control, right? Where women had real autonomy. And just the labor of love. I was getting these objects that were embroidered and sewn and laced that never would leave the house. They would have no sort of commodity value, and yet they were precious and dear. And that meant a lot to me in thinking about the labor of care, the labor that happens inside the home that is primarily done by women. And so the aprons became, and one day I was looking at these aprons and they had these ties, you know, the apron ties around your waist. And I thought, I was looking at the ties and I thought, they look like forlorn arms looking for a body to hold. And I was like, well, these aprons are just exactly part of this project. And so I began to use the aprons. And so this has become this amazing project that has taken on a life of its own. I follow it, right? I listen to what it tells me. And again, ideas of aggregation being a way to make visible the hidden labors of care. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we were Zooming in our home. We were seeing each other's living rooms. We were teaching at home. We were raising our kids at home. We were doing all of the things at home that were suddenly visible. And the Zoom screen became kind of like our public square in a sense. And so a lot of hidden labor, the labor of domesticity, the labor of teachers, the labor of factory workers, of food service people became visible during the pandemic. And is that my timer? And so it was an interesting parallel to that, thinking about the hidden labor of women through the aggregation of these very small threads, right? One after one, after one, after one, becoming these enormous, enormous, powerful threads of, autonomy. Related very much during the pandemic to the kind of visibility of the hidden labor that we saw during the pandemic. And so I feel like that is an important part of the work, is making that hidden labor visible. So I hope that, I don't know where I am in time, but I hope that there will be some time for questions. I'm really excited to meet all of you. And I really hope to see some of you at my installation, which I've been working incredibly hard on tomorrow night. So thank you so much.
I just love hearing about the art. It's very important. Yes. Is that my phone? Yeah, why did it talk? So I'm going to introduce Angela Alles right now, who's an artist from Lowell. These are her paintings behind me. I don't know a lot about Angela, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about the narrative of her work, because I know that it comes from her woman's soul. She's an immigrant, that part of the story, and I just want to hear about how you do what you do. But here is about Angela. She is an artist living in Lowell. We're new to each other, but she writes, "For over 25 years, my artistic process has in large part been both the means of searching for spiritual and philosophical meaning in my life, as well as the act of recording this search," which I love. That's what artists do. They search and then they record. Throughout this journey, recording symbols and icons have solidified into my personal language. Another thing artists do, they find their icons and they make them into their language. Most recently, my socio-political experiences as a Latin American immigrant and female artist have come to the forefront of my inner dialogue and have coalesced as a central theme of my artistic voice. I am very intrigued about accessing material from the unconscious mind and allowing it to be part of my creative process. I feel it keeps me conscientious. I think that's just so perfect. So welcome, Angela Alles, please.
And I want to apologize for walking through your presentation. I just an hour and a half in the car, I needed to use the restroom. So as Paula mentioned, my name is Angela Liz. I am an artist. I'm a painter. I was born in Colombia. My father is from the south of Spain, and my grandfather from my mother's side is Lebanese. So I am quite a mixture of passion. I came to the United States when I was 13 years old. I was a dancer. My mom had a dance studio. I danced for about 20 years. But when I was 11 years old, my stepfather had an accident, and I realized that my ability physically to do something artistic could be limited by an accident or something like that. So I could count on my eyesight and on my hands as long as I would have them. So my work became more, I moved on to the visual arts, to painting. So I've been painting all my life, but I took it seriously right after the accident when I was 11, and I realized that I couldn't be a dancer forever. So I became a painter. When I moved to the States, I moved to Miami. And in Miami, everyone is Latin, so I didn't really feel discriminated, or I just felt like I was in another part of South America with a lot of Cubans. That's the only thing, a lot of Cubans. Actually, I married one. When you live there, you don't really have an option. So I moved to New York because I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship in New York City for art school. And then I went back to Miami, and I realized how much I missed the seasons and the architecture and the snow. And I just didn't want to deal with hurricanes and the heat. So we ended up moving to Lowell about 8 years ago. And I am thrilled to be there. I'm part of a Western Avenue artist community. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. We're open to the public the first Saturday of every month. So anyways, I've always, like Paula mentioned, I've always worked on my psychological, my spiritual exploration. And then unfortunately, the previous White House administration happened. And for the first time in my life, I felt I was being kind of persecuted, or, I felt danger for some reason as an immigrant, as a woman. I work with a technique called automatism. And if you're not familiar with that technique, a lot of the surrealists and even writers today use that technique where they allow the subconscious to flow. It all started one morning. I was in my studio. This is when I was working on my thesis to graduate. And I was stuck. I didn't know what to paint. And my mother was coming to town. And my mom has always been my worst critic. That mother love doesn't work in that point when it comes to that. She was my first art teacher, my first dance teacher. So she's always been very hard on me. So anyways, I was stuck. I was afraid of what she was going to think. I didn't know what to do. And the professor found me, and I'm going to give you my age kind of right now, sitting in a corner, listening to my Walkman. And I was kind of teary, and he's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I just stretched this pristine white canvas." It was like 80 by 40. I was like, "I'm terrified. I'm afraid of damaging it." So he had his coffee and his cigarette, and he turned off his cigarette on my canvas and then poured the coffee over it. And he said, "Fix it." And to be honest, from that moment on, he freed me, he liberated me. So what I do every time is I spill the equivalent of the cigarette and the coffee, and I wait for the stains to settle. And then I turn the canvas around until something speaks. And then from there, I start the piece. So I never have anything preconceived. During, I would say to 2017, I had an exhibition. I had to finish a lot of work. It was in Miami. I had barely anything new. So I started doing, my spilling and doing multiple paintings at the same time. And I realized as I was looking at the images that were coming out, that it was all based on immigration. So my subconscious speaks. I mean, no matter what you guys do in art, your subconscious is always going to come out. It's amazing how it speaks. And I realized that it was all about immigration, because that was the part that it was in my mind constantly. So some of these pieces, like this one and the fish in the back, have to do with that series of immigration. I was trying to, without knowing, once I had the series finished, I was able to sit back and look at them. I realized what I was doing was trying to convey the humanity of the immigrant. I was so tired of listening to the words being used. Rapist, they're coming to steal your jobs. They come to the States and they all get computers and $40,000. Where's my computer? I'm still waiting for it. That doesn't happen, They pay taxes. It's just, there's so many things that happen that people don't want to see or don't want to learn. So I wanted to convey that humanity of the immigrant, of what we have to, well, I was fortunate, I didn't have to struggle, but a lot of them have to uproot and not know where they're going to end up, So I was starting to think a lot about my intersectionality and my privilege and the other parts where I wasn't so privileged. And that's what started to come out in the artwork. Then after that, I did another series that ended up being more of like the transition. It's called Transitus. And it's the transition between where we were 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago to where we are now. And the one over there is more abstract, that is about taking off the veil and seeing the reality of where we are as a society, as a humanity. what's the other one? Oh, and this one is about, well, you can talk about this one much better than me. This is Kali, the god, one of the Hindu goddess, and it has to do with breaking barriers. And it's a strong woman in the Hindu religion is symbolized with a necklace of men's heads, and her tongue is out and she's vicious. And this is my interpretation of her. She's breaking through the barriers our society is placing on women till this day, you know. So that's what my work is about right now. I am in another transition. I kind of let my subconscious, like I said, speak, and I'm waiting to hear the subconscious, because right now have a bunch of pieces just starting, but they haven't spoken back. So I'm just waiting and listening. And that's it. That's what I do. Thank you.
So we have one more wonderful artist speaker. As soon as we're finished, we're going to grab these chairs, take them out of your way so that you can talk to the artists and have more refreshment. So before I introduce Mary Hart, who's I put her last because they're precious and they take us down to the smallest little details. But I am going to speak just for a second about Helen Zugheib's work, who can't be here. And these are her gouaches. So Helen Zugheib was the daughter of a State Department civil service. Her family left Lebanon in 1975 due to the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War. Her themes are centered around hopefulness, healing, and spirituality, using visual arts to shape and foster positive ideas about the Middle East. She has served as cultural envoy to Palestine, Switzerland, and Saudi Arabia. She has also been selected for the 2021-2023 inaugural social practice residency by the John Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. I think that's where she is tonight. I'll just read a quote of hers, please. I've loved working with her too. She was just exquisite. As an Arab American, I hope through my work to encourage dialogue and bring understanding and acceptance between the people of the Arab world and the West, especially since 9/11. Our wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the more recent revolutions and crises in the Arab world resulting from the Arab Spring that began in late 2010, leading to the current war in Syria and the massive displacement of people seeking refuge in Europe, the Middle East, and in America. My work is ultimately about creating empathy and creating a shared space for introspection and dialogue. But the series we have here is stories my father told me. We have 6 of her pieces. She writes, my brothers and sisters and I are fortunate to have our own Hakawati storyteller, whose stories stemmed from his love for his children and his desire to entertain. Let me tell you a story, he would say, and so it would begin. The paintings I created correspond to each of his 25 stories. On a personal level, these paintings illustrate my father's childhood, my own childhood, and my Lebanese Syrian heritage. I hope these paintings help viewers recall their own stories, their own childhoods, and help us all share those common experiences across borders. There's a theme going on here, ladies and gentlemen, and we love it. Okay, thank you for your patience. Thank you, Mary Hart, for your patience. They came in a tiny box. Usually they had to be like in an intimate relationship with your pieces. And when I spoke to Mary, she was like, well, why are you asking me, to be part of this? Because she's not, obviously political, but her work is part of the tapestry of femininity, of womanness. And they spoke to me so much. This is her series here of part of her series of hours, is it called? Yes. We have morning, noon, midnight, and 3 a.m. And for me, I resonated with every one of those hours as part of my life and my lifestyle. But so Mary Hart is a painter and printmaker from Southern Maine. Born and raised in Connecticut, she moved to Maine in the 80s to teach and to paint. Dealing with issues of growth, damage, struggle, and beauty, Hart's work links the natural world with an inner narrative. Her small, sometimes miniature paintings and prints are intensely focused and detailed. Their larger purpose is the formation of visual associations that describe the artist's place in the world and her emotional response to it. So our final guest artist, Mary Hart.
My timer up here. I like to be organized. I'm a teacher, and when I teach, if I don't have a clock in the back of the room, the lessons are just a wreck. I never know when they're going to end. Lift this up a little. So I was so pleased that Paula asked me, because I've been in kind of a period of hibernation for a while. I think during the pandemic, and then the gallery I had been in before had closed, and I just sort of was in a lull. I was making things, but I haven't showed for quite a while. So you asked me, Paula, and then another woman curator who I really admire in Portland asked me at about the same time to participate in a show that was all about women's art. And I thought there must be a sign there that I need to pay attention to. So thank you for sort of knocking on the door and opening things up for me. So this afternoon, actually most of today, I thought I should really sit down and write a narrative to talk to you guys about, but it was such a beautiful day. And I went out in the garden and the garden is a mess. And so I spent a lot of time in my backyard in Portland, digging up things and throwing out raspberry canes and stuff like that. And that's a parable really of what I do in my work. I was raised in the country. The natural world has been the source of my metaphors since I started making art as a young kid. And the need to take chaos and find order has also been a driving force in my work all the way along. And I think particularly in my recent work, and I love hearing what Angela said about surrealism and finding meaning in the unconscious, because for me, that's part of the process. The pouring, the spilling is creating a chaotic event. And then my job as an artist is to find the order in that, find the inner meaning that is driving my own narrative forward. So when Paula asked, I didn't judge what she was up to. I just was very excited and I wanted to see what was happening. And she picked these two bodies of work from my website, Sight Unseen, never having seen the scale of them or the surface. And again, I was sort of fascinated because Paula, your comments about my work were really acute. It's like, oh, she gets what I'm up to here. This is very exciting because that doesn't always happen with curators. So she picked an earlier series of work, the figure paintings. There's one over there, one here, one behind me here, and then one on my right that I did. I can't remember. They were like 2011 or 2012. They were quite a ways back. And they were paintings about my body. They were paintings about reaching middle age and what was happening as I was aging, my response to it, my sense of identity as a woman that was changing and morphing as I headed into that time period. And I was trying to deal with some of the ugliness and difficulty of aging and rethink it, look at it again. So this one here is about the thought that the body is mostly water and that you can dissolve and reappear and kind of slip in and out of the water because you are part of it. The one over there has barnacles growing on the body, and it's like an old boat that sits around long enough and starts to get encrusted and encroached on. This beautiful body you're born with starts to age and become something different. And this one here is thinking about the body thickening, rounding out. And the idea that for most women in America, gaining weight is such a terrible thing. It's such a toxic thing. And I thought, well, what if we flip that upside down and that becomes our act of buoyancy and it lifts us up and raises us. And the one behind me is about the idea of insomnia, which also came on really strongly in middle age, especially after raising a child that kept me up a lot at night. So I was trying to find a protective space to deal with that insomnia. So these are all things about particularly my body, but women's bodies and the life cycle that we go through. And I think a lot about, I have two artist favorites that I look to a great deal. One is Georgia O'Keeffe, who said when she first showed her work that she didn't want to be categorized as a woman artist. And I love her work, and I've been influenced by it a lot over the years. And I think it's a good thing now to be able to say I'm a woman artist, and that this is the material that I make art about, and that I'm happy to be in a show with other women artists and to deal with these issues. And the other artist I think of is Barbara Kruger, who was probably the first sort of overtly political artist that I was really intrigued by. Oh no, already? Okay. Barbara Kruger has a piece that says, we won't play nature to your culture. And it was a feminist piece saying that it's a big photograph of a woman lying down with 2 leaves on her eyes, as if she's been blinded by nature. And I keep thinking, well, why not? You know, why don't we play nature to culture? Because culture has proved inadequate, and we need to offset it with a sensitivity to nature and an awareness of nature that can perhaps redeem us as before we destroy the place we live. So those are 2 artists that have this series of paintings here comes from the idea of a book of hours. I'm always looking back to look forward. My work went through a period when I was younger, when it was very abstract, and then it came back slowly to imagery, and then it got tighter and tighter and more like a Flemish still life. So I've been wrestling with that, and I love Book of Hours because I love their sense of time passing and the idea of points of meditation during a day. A Book of Hours is a medieval manuscript. It's a prayer book, basically, and they are beautifully illustrated with gold and with botanical drawings and with narratives. And then the text is hand lettered in between. And they were very precious things. They were meant to be cherished. So I made my own Book of Hours, and it follows the course of a day, as Paula pointed out. And the reason they're not for sale is there's 4 more paintings in the series, and I'm not quite ready to let them go. I want to show them again as a group. They've only been up once together in public before the pandemic, and I'd like to have them up again as a group. And they're like Angela's work. I start with an unconscious surface. I'm not pouring things, but I'm throwing paint at the panel and sanding it down and building it up again, and kind of just randomly messing around with the surface in these. And then on top of that, I let the imagery, I knew I was dealing with a time of day, so that was the framework for each one. And then I let the imagery materialize on top of that, just by having a lot of stuff in my studio that I put on top of it, and I move it around and I wait and I see which object speaks to me, which one tells the story I need to tell. And it is a waiting game. You don't always know. And sometimes you paint something and you still don't know. And then you paint something else. And eventually, if you're quiet enough, you can hear it. It comes together. So the paintings, each one is dealing with this time of day. It's also dealing with my sense of nature, because that's where most of the imagery is coming from. And I am constantly listening to the news, constantly watching what's going on in the media. And I'm very affected by the sense of anxiety about climate change in our natural world. So I think that kind of hovering anxiety is there, although it's not overt in the work at all. I never think of my work as overtly political. It's really a personal, emotional narrative, but we all live in this world. We're all constantly aware of it and sensitive to it, and it filters through us. So the morning painting is about the kind of pleasant banality of buttercups. They're everywhere, and they're so beautiful, and they greet us every day, and they're ephemeral. And they, for me, were about this moment of time that is happy and very fleeting. The noontime one in the middle with the leaf and the moth is about that tipping point in time, which to me relates a lot to the period we're in right now. We're at a very fine point. We're on the head of a pin. And which way do we tip? How do we deal with this delicate situation we're in? Midnight is the closing of day, and it's an act of defiance. There's one last match to strike. And 3 a.m. is the dark hour for me. It's a time when I have my deepest, darkest, most twisting thoughts. The moon in that is a squashed bottle cap, and the seed pod here is not a teasel plant. It's a Jimson weed, which when I found it in my backyard in Connecticut, my parents' backyard, my mother happily identified it. She's the one that taught me to look at nature as a poisonous plant. Throw that away, Mary. So of course I took it home with me to paint. And Jimson weed, I was looking it up a little bit more today, and it's actually a hallucinogen, and it's a natural herb that's used as a medicine for asthma and things like that. So it has these multiple purposes, but when I put it in there, it was about the difficulty in darkness at that time of night. I paint these things like this because it takes me out of my body and it puts me in a place where I feel I'm fully present in the world in this act of meditation on the thing that's in front of me. It takes me so long to paint these things that I really live with them and I honor them and I become almost part of them. So that's what I think about when I'm painting the realism that I do. And I could never make a huge painting like this because it would feel overdone to me and it would feel like way too much work. It would be so many hours that the meditation would be overwhelming. So I make small work and I use a few things. I've been alongside doing these paintings and up to the present, I've been doing a lot of paintings where I'm pouring ink, which Angela made me just bring me back to the first time I poured ink on a piece of paper on the floor and felt this sense of kind of excitement and liberation in it. And I've been making ink flows of different sizes, just India ink in the same way that Rorschach tests work, or that the surrealists would often deal with these accidental moments and work into them. But I've been finding my own narrative in them. I've always found the surrealists to be sort of violent and misogynist. So I've been finding a narrative that makes sense to me in the moments where I create these opportunities. And one of the things that I've been doing during the pandemic is I worked in collaboration with a friend of mine who's a budding poet, a new poet. And we went back and forth by Zoom and a little bit in person, but mostly Zoom and email. And we made this book that is all my drawings. So there are all these ink flows, and then they have perfectly precise things painted into them. And they're really about dealing with chaos and controlling chaos, or responding to chaos, or not controlling chaos, attempting maybe to fix it with a piece of blue tape, but perhaps not being quite able to do that. So the book is called Cast, and we self-published it. It was just something we did together. And it was really wonderful to work in collaboration with someone else. And it was wonderful to take all these little bits of paper that had been flying around my studio and formalize them and make them into, in a way, their own narrative within this book. So that's my work. I'm a teacher predominantly. I spend a lot of time teaching students. I teach at Bowdoin College right now. And the work of that is incredibly exciting and inspiring as well. It does take a lot of time though. So thank you, Paula, for giving me the chance.
I just wanted to say goodbye to our Zoom attendees and thank you for coming, and ask for your patience while we raise the chairs. The artists are here. They'd love to talk to you, so please do stay. Thank you so much. Thank you.